Come on in, everybody. Please take your seats. Okay, Michael, take it away.
Hello. Hi, welcome back. Hopefully you got some coffee and ready to jump right back in. I'm Michael Ratner. I'm with Congressional Research Service, and I had the pleasure of coming up last year, and Andrew was nice enough to invite me back, this time as a moderator. Our panel today is talking about energy security, looking at the different components of energy security, national security, economic security, and sustainability. Fortunately, a lot of the topics or a lot of the ideas and concepts have already been talked about, so hopefully we can speed our session along. I think we have a really good panel, people with different backgrounds to address certain aspects of it, of energy security. And so with that, I will do a brief introduction, which will be in the order of the speakers, so that they can get queued up and ready to go. Our first speaker will be Mark Finley, who's a fellow at Rice University. I've known Mark for a long time. And prior to his time at Rice, he was the lead economist in North America for the BP Statistical Review of World Energy. And he's going to be our first speaker. Our second speaker will be Dr. Dabia Al-Mohanadi, who's with Texas A&M's campus in Qatar. So she comes at this from a bit more of a technical background in how she approaches this topic. Third will be Dr. Mark Troutman, to my right, the only one who was able to make it up here, which is great. Mark is a 20-year veteran in the U.S. Army and has held a number of jobs there and a number of academic appointments, and has his PhD from George Mason University. And so he's going to approach it that way. And then our last speaker, hopefully, she's there. Hi, Sarah. Is Sarah Vakashwari, who is has her own energy consulting and geopolitical practice. And so with that, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll get started.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks to you and to Andrew for the invitation. Sorry I wasn't able to join you all in person, especially because I have a personal connection up there. My wife is from nearby. She went to school in Meadville. In fact, our wedding announcement was published in the Oil City Derrick. And when we were newlyweds, we were both junior energy security analysts at the CIA, and had the good fortune to visit Titusville in the historical collection over 30 years ago, and have made return trips since then with our daughters. So hopefully next year, as they say, in the Holy Land, right? I wanted to just make some introductory remarks about how I'm thinking about energy security, and as the title of this panel lays out, how we balance thinking about security, prosperity, and sustainability. And Michael specifically asked me to focus on kind of what's changed, or how has the Russian invasion of Ukraine changed things. And I think my bottom line is that I think the Russian invasion has put us in a position where we can't ignore the fact that we need to take an all of the above approach to these various policy prerogatives, i.e., you can't do energy transition without thinking about energy sustainability and affordability and security. that we still need to pay attention to all of this. And indeed, when we think about an energy transition, I think it's reminded us that we need to focus on the word transition, and that it's also highlighted the centrality of energy to our everyday life, in a way that we can't ignore. And I want to give some basic data to highlight that. I mean, just gasoline alone, last year's increase, just the increase in prices at the pump last year cost the average American family about an extra $1,000. That's real money. And it highlights how central access to affordable energy is. And it doesn't just show up in family pocketbooks, it shows up in the national aggregates. Gasoline price inflation had a big part to play with the inflation rate running up to 9%. And by my calculations, at least, as the consumer price index fell from 9% last summer to 3% this summer, gasoline by itself accounted for 2/3 of that decline. And that was even though gasoline is only a tiny proportion of the overall basket of consumer goods that are being tracked. We also know that prices at the pump have an outsized impact on things like consumer confidence. They track very well with each other. When price at the pump goes up, consumer confidence goes down. Most of the world's economists would look at the role of gasoline and say, yeah, it's not that big a deal, but it's big. It punches above its weight. And part of it is because the price is screamed at you from every street corner in foot-high numbers. And it correlates with something going wrong in the world, like, oh, now. It also, by the way, has an outsized impact on things like the president's job approval rating, which explains why last year when prices at the pump were hitting record levels, his chief of staff was waking up every morning and checking AAA's website to see what prices at the pump had done overnight. And why as recently as just a few weeks ago, you heard President Biden say, we're going to do everything we can to get prices down at the pump, because it matters. And in fact, I would say, tying it back to the energy transition, we'll fail at our efforts to transition to a more sustainable energy system if we can't adequately address the need to maintain secure, affordable, reliable energy in the meanwhile. And I think that that's a key point, that you don't just jump to the new end state of a net zero world, but that the events of the last year have reminded us, if we needed reminding, that we need to invest in maintaining a functional energy system at each point in time between now and then. By the way, as we think about prosperity and what this means for prosperity, I think it's important to introduce the concept of equity into our definitions. We're going to hear a lot about equity between rich countries and poor countries at the Global Climate Summit in Dubai next month. But I would argue it's relevant here in the United States as well. So for example, who benefits in the United States from aggressive subsidies for electric vehicles and rooftop solar? People who can afford to buy new cars and people who can afford to buy houses. The data shows that the wealthiest U.S. families are an order of magnitude more likely to own an electric car than lower income households. And the same data applies, broadly speaking, to home ownership as well. Meanwhile, lower income households are more likely to drive internal combustion engines. They also live further away, drive longer distances, older cars that are less fuel efficient. And so policies that provide aggressive subsidies for new energy forms and that seek to penalize the development of our existing energy forms put an disproportionate burden on lower income families and households and voters, which is why you see the administration paying more attention to that issue. You probably noticed that in the IRA, there were provisions to extend electric car subsidies into the resale market as a way to begin to try to address some of this. Now, I would argue more broadly, that we can actually help the cause of the energy transition by demonstrating that we're thinking about how to manage issues like energy security and prosperity and equity through this transition. And I want to end with just a few remarks about, how to think about energy security and the energy transition. And I'm going to use a paper that I wrote a few years ago at the Baker Institute that's based on the way that we analyzed energy security when I worked at the CIA. We would try to analyze energy security in terms of vulnerability, offsets, risk, vulnerability, risk, and offsets. So you can think about, how vulnerable are we to a source of energy? How risky is it? And what can we do to offset any disruption? And so for oil, for example, we can reduce our vulnerability by becoming more efficient and by diversifying our energy mix. We can reduce the risk of energy supply disruptions through our conduct of foreign policy or by parking the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. And we can develop the ability to offset disruptions, for example, by building a strategic petroleum reserve. None of that exists. None of that thinking has been applied to anything other than oil. And so I hear people say, well, renewables will be great, electric cars, because it'll reduce our dependence on oil. That's true, it will. But it may introduce new forms of risk and vulnerability. For example, the amount of batteries being produced around the world, or the processing of rare earths that are key components of batteries, as well as other forms of renewable energy, are way more concentrated than the world's oil production is. Now, admittedly, it's different. Oil is a fuel. Once you burn what's in the tank of your car, you can't go anywhere. If China were to disrupt future, shipments of electric cars, or its dominance of rare earth metals, the ones we already have would keep working. So it's one is an input and one is a fuel. So it's important to quantify or think about the differences. But my point is, we've been practicing energy security for oil for 50 years, and we have tools to help us manage our vulnerabilities, the riskiness of it, the ability to offset. None of that exists for any other form of energy or for any of the mineral inputs that are going to be crucial to the energy transition. And that, that's beginning to change. The State Department now has a strategic minerals initiative, for example. But it's very early days, and those capabilities aren't very far advanced yet. And so, if we want to, achieve a more sustainable energy system in the future, we need to make sure that we do it, while we continue to manage the security, the sustainability, the affordability, the access issues as well. And indeed, if we fail at that, we'll fail at the energy transition too. Hope that's not too long of an intro, Michael, but I'll pause there. Thanks. Oh, by the way, I should mention, I apologize in advance, but I am going to have to drop off a few minutes early, like Amy. I had another thing scheduled, before this agenda was fine-tuned.
Thank you, Mark, and we appreciate you being with us. All right, turn it over to Dr. Al-Mohammadi for 5 to 10 minutes of remarks.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation and to be included in this conference. And my deep apologies for not making it to Oil City. I was looking forward to it. Hopefully can join you next year. I'm not a policy expert, but I'm a technical person. I come from a background of chemical engineering, and I see the energy transition as a challenge and an opportunity for research and for education. If you don't mind, I will share some slides to talk you through the Qatar experience in our own energy transition, and hopefully you can see the similarities with Pennsylvania, and we share some of the opportunities with the US. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. It says it's in motion.
I think it's stuck, so I will just try to restart. All right. Can you still see me or hear me?
We can hear you. We hear you fine.
Okay, sorry again. Just let's try it again. Can you see the screen?
We don't see your slides.
And not, we can hear you, but we can't see. It says it started sharing the screen, but it's just a black screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Then for the sake of time, I'll just move on and hopefully it will work at one point. So it says screen sharing is paused. Yeah. So I think you can you see it now or it works on my side?
Not yet. Why don't you go on with your remarks and we'll hope the technology will catch up.
I tried doing that. We'll do it again. And should work, but it says also your screen is being paused. So right, then we can just continue without. So I come from Qatar, which is a energy-rich country, and we have relied heavily on hydrocarbons for the prosperity and the well-being of our society. In 1940, there was around 16,000 people living in the state of Qatar, and this is prior to the production of any oil. And in 2022, we have over 2.8 million people that are living in Qatar and able to enjoy the highest GDP in the world. And at the same time, we hosted the whole world for the World Cup, and we were able to have all of this due to the discovery and the use of natural gas. Now, we know that climate change is a huge issue, and Qatar is at a risk at climate change. We rely heavily on hydrocarbons for our water. We don't have any fresh water. We rely 100% on natural gas to drive desalination processes to produce water, which enables life. At the same time, we make the fuel that is the cleaner transition fuel that is being transported for the rest of the world. So we export to Asia, to Japan, South Korea, China, to India, Pakistan, and also we have some collaborations with Europe where we have some gas export. At the same time, we also export regionally to the UAE and Oman. We understand that we need to have economic diversification and development away from natural gas because it puts us at a risk of, because of climate change, that there will be a decrease in demand. At the same time, there is an issue that Qatar lives already, 96% of the population lives along the sea. So there's a high risk of any issues of sea level rises. Then we compromise a lot of our billions worth of assets in terms of industrial facilities, natural gas production, petrochemical production. At the same time, it would risk the population which lives across the coast. So that puts us a very unique challenge that we need to reduce our emissions or understand how to reduce our emissions when time comes, and we need to know as well how to reduce that. So if we look at our own energy profile, you see that it's 100% natural gas for the power and water sector, and locally we have some oil production, and we're using that for transportation. And our oil exports have declined, our natural gas has increased in production in the past years. And this is before, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, when the transition happened, because we noticed that there was a decline on oil production. Now, if something similar happens, so what will Qatar do for the next phase? So to reduce our own emissions, most of the emissions comes from the industrial sector, which is from the mining of the oil and the gas itself. So it produces high concentration of CO2 that is being currently emitted to the atmosphere. Secondary comes our power and water, then our transportation. Whereas in the US, you have a complete different mix. You have a lot of your emissions coming from the transportation sector, industrial, but also the agriculture sector. So we thought that this can't happen, that we have a similar procedure, say, for the US, that will work for Qatar, that will work for Japan. So at Texas A&M, we looked into different ways of reducing CO2, and we tried to look into options of doing that at the same time managing our grid and our demand. And we discovered that there is opportunities available for Qatar, opportunities available, say, for different countries that don't fit the same solution, that one solution fits for every different region. In the US, there is a lot of opportunities for renewable integration within the grid, which makes it more secure, because you have places like the state of Texas where they have a lot of production of renewable energy, at the same time oil and gas production. And that diversification came about naturally because it was profitable to do so. So if we try to replicate something like that in Qatar, it doesn't work because we don't have the similar geographical diversity, at the same time, not the same opportunities. We have a lot of solar. However, solar still is is still not at a scale that can be integrated. We have fairly new electricity grid that is connected to all the nation. You can feed up to 30% of solar into it without any issues. However, after that, it has to be completely renewed and new investments that have to be done. So Qatar has invested in R&D, especially for smart grid management. There was also some discussions on how to integrate renewables. Now they have announced 250 megawatts into the grid, and this can be expanded into the future. Recently, there has been an announcement that the natural gas production will continue. The North Field expansion, which is our biggest field in the country, which we share with Iran, we're producing a lot of natural gas, and we have international partners who are helping us in the production. This includes ConocoPhillips, Exxon, Shell, and Total Energy, among other countries and other companies. So there will be an increase in natural gas production as we see that the world would need this. This is based on our analysis. At the same time, we see that there will be need for CO2 management and reduction of the CO2 emission that would be coming from it, just in case there is a next shift. We think that hydrogen, we did some modeling and Texan in our team, again, engineers, we like our models. And we saw that hydrogen has a lot of potential, not in the transportation sector, but in the heavy to abate sectors. This includes shipping. And we've run some scenarios with looking into, can oil tankers be the route or elongate their lives to transport hydrogen? And there are some great opportunities there to use liquid organic hydrogen carriers, for example, and use existing oil tanker fleets to transport hydrogen back and forth. This is not looking at the hydrogen production itself. Obviously, electrolysis has been discussed before. Green hydrogen is possible, not at the scale that we expected right now. However, natural gas with carbon capture and storage could work only if you pick the right source of CO2 to reduce. So as part of natural gas processing, the CO2 is taken out of the ground to the mining itself, and then that is already separated through the desulfurization process, which can be re-injected into the reservoirs at a lower cost than, say, direct air capture, which are some technologies that have been discussed. There are other opportunities as well. To do some blue ammonia, which we know how to transport ammonia, and it also works as a fertilizer. So there's also opportunity to produce CO2 with ammonia, the cleaner hydrogen to produce more urea. And we believe that actually could help, but then you talk about the whole life. So the emission reduction is not straight line. We do believe that there are some challenges still. One of them is the energy storage issue. Heavy mining of materials could produce more CO2. So there is a lot of research, some of it coming from the US, on looking into sodium and different types of energy storage solutions that could be more renewable and more sustainable and cost-effective. Still, it's not there. Say in the second technology readiness level, it has to be demonstrated on a large scale. The other issue is the decarbonization of the heating sector. You rely heavily on fossil fuels for heating. It's not easy to replace that with renewable energy, so it's still an open question. Can it be a combination, say, of renewables with hydrogen, some fossil fuels with some capture technology? It has to be a mix customized for the specific solution. We do believe that it is a global problem. However, it needs a local solution to start with. And we have developed in Texas A&M Qatar and Texas A&M main campus, especially the Energy Institute. We looked at different types of technologies, and we're working with other segments. Again, a technical person had to work with economists and trying to understand how would be a bigger solution that can scale it up for different segments and sectors. So I would be happy to share with you some of our work if you time allows, and I'm really sorry about the technical issue.
Great, thank you. Dr. Troutman?
Great, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Andrew, for the invitation. I am remiss to say that I am a son of Pennsylvania. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, or as the natives say, Philadelphia. And I have never been up to this region of the country, so thank you for the invitation to see it. I knew how beautiful it was, but it's really neat to see it firsthand. If I could have my, if you could put up my slides, yeah, thank you. I presently serve as the Chief Operating Officer of Strategic Education International. We're a nonprofit foundation that is focused on the education of national security professionals, broadly defined, not just military, but also diplomatic, economic, and those in the intelligence community. And in one of my previous academic appointments that Michael made reference to, I directed a research center at George Mason University that focused on critical infrastructure protection. Of course, one of the critical infrastructure sectors is the energy sector and its relationship to the overall economic health of a nation. So I think it's probably appropriate at sort of first business to deconstruct a little bit this idea of economics, energy, and its relationship to national security so that we can reconstruct it. I teach a course at Georgetown University on economics and national security, and what I usually open with students is painting for them the picture of a national economy as an enormous resource generator of stuff, that's a very precise economic term, and capabilities for which a nation addresses its strategic priorities, first and foremost of which is the maintenance of living standards of living of a population, and then apportionment of resources to security and projection of influence. And in as much as energy is a key input to any and all economic processes, it's of immense importance to the economic health of a nation and its ability to generate those goods and services on which we rely. I really appreciate the focus of the conference that is looking to the past to learn and project into the future, especially as we are in a period of transition. And as all of you know, history tells us that periods of transition can be periods of elevated risk. It's not as if the world has not been through energy transitions before. We've been through at least two, one from wood to coal, a transition later on coal to oil, of which this location is very central in that process. And here we find ourselves in a position of transitioning from essentially a hydrocarbon-based energy source of economic activity to something out there that is yet to be determined. So what I like to do is just put a left foot in what has been and project it to what will be. And if I could have the next slide, this is what oil supply chains look like, oil-based supply chains look like. And the interesting thing that we know about energy is that it doesn't often appear in the place where you want to use it, so you have to get it from source to use. And the second is that it very often will not be in a form at extraction that is useful for actual use. You've got to go through some process to make it into a usable form. And of course, that's true to the first energy transition. Some of you are familiar with this. You use that old form of wood burned in your wood stove. Well, you've got to get it down from the tree, split, and into a usable form to turn it into heat from your house. And that is one of those historical regularities. This is a really good graphic from Bloomberg that shows world crude oil supplies going from source to source to use. And actually, this is from actually source to process uses, then a further picture in this. And you can see some of the volumes and the costs that are associated with it. And so then thinking of energy security in a supply chain sense, I want to borrow from a concept from a fairly recent executive order that addressed not hydrocarbon-based energy security, but the materials of energy sources yet to come that I'll address in a moment. And that, of course, is Executive Order 13817, which came out in 2017, and it clarified the security of energy supply chains as, or critical minerals associated with that, as any input that is essential to economic and national security. Well, that's one. History has showed it. Second is that it flows through a supply chain. There it is, right there. And third, that it serves some essential function that, if disrupted, causes a significant impact. And I think Sid made that point very, very clear in his remarks earlier, that a society without energy degrades very, very quickly and introduces extreme risk of loss and most importantly, loss of life. So one of the aspects in supply chains, and particularly illustrated in oil, is a direction of flow, and then a disparity of source to further processing. One of those regularities about the oil sector, and many of you who work in it know it, is that oil is a commodity, yet oil is not oil. Oil sourced from, say, South America has a different composition than light sweet crude, than Brent. And while it is possible to reconfigure your processing facility, your cracking facility, to take a new grade of crude, it's neither easy nor is it trivial in expense. It's actually a pretty complicated chemistry and industrial industrial investment process. So it's not only necessary to secure the source, but also the transportation mode and the source of processing. And of course, disruptions can happen anywhere and do along the way, as the recent experience in Ukraine has showed us. That's oil. Next is natural gas, if I could have the next one. And I think you'll notice here that predominantly the flows are east-west. And actually, natural gas is also a great instructive of not only transition in source, but also transition in technology. Actually, in a lot of ways, natural gas is a newcomer to the relative newcomer to the hydrocarbons field. Crude, 1870s. We knew about natural gas at the time. Interestingly, I was browsing the exhibits before we started here, and there's an interesting one on natural gas that for the longest time was a nuisance, was considered a dangerous byproduct until some smart person figured, wow, this could be a fuel. And further, we get another benefit from it. Not only is it a fuel, but it's also a much less dirty fuel and hydrocarbon than oil or ultimately coal as a source. We didn't come upon that really until about the 1960s in a meaningful way. And so a great demonstration in how technology can unlock the things that are literally right near your nose. And a second demonstration of technology, of course, this is shipborne natural gas, of course, in its liquefied form. It's the only way that you can transport it efficiently by ship. I won't put up a picture of pipeline technology. Of course, that's the first way, and one of the predominant ways that we transport natural gas. But it was really not until the late 90s that this mode of conveyance between source and processing and ultimate use came on the scene in a meaningful way. And it was the hard work of a couple of foreign, very, very forward-leaning nations and investors, Qatar being one of them, that invested very heavily in its ability to liquefy natural gas, and it has made all the difference in the past few years as well. So, innovation, investment, time really matter in transitions, but even in all of those, it still remains that the elasticity of these sources is really, really difficult. I don't want to tread over that glibly saying, wow, time and investment changes everything. It literally takes years to make these sorts of transitions. Now, let's look to the future, and don't flip the slide yet, but this is the simple world that we live in. And I know I'm going to make some people who are going to talk to me at lunch right now. This isn't simple at all. But compared to what I'll show you, this is simple. And of course, all of the discussions about how do you manage price, excess capacity, we know all the economics of that. We have had 50 years of experience doing that. This is the future. And if you could put up the next slide, this is what is necessary for the energy transition of the future. In making batteries, 5 key elements: lithium, cobalt, manganese, nickel, and graphite. Those are kind of the base materials necessary to make both small scale and, more importantly, large scale industrial storage, which is necessary for the kind of grid of the future to facilitate power generation and transmission. And interestingly, just like the energy transitions of the past, there are technologies that we know, but there are competing technologies, and there's not really one dominant that is clear coming out on top. Of course, lithium is kind of the major battery source, but there's some really exciting research and development that is coming up with different modes. But that doesn't change the fact that there's those 5 elements that, as one of the earlier speakers mentioned, occur in completely different places geographically, and of course are subject to all of that supply chain risk. And then there's a second element of future energy transition, and that is what you have heard about a lot, the rare earth elements that are necessary. Those are the base materials, those 5 that I mentioned, but those processing and catalyzing materials, there are essentially 4, 2 light, 2 heavy, rare earth elements. I won't pronounce their names because I do not wish to embarrass myself in front of this august audience. But count them: 5 base, 4 rare earth elements. That's the world of complexity of the green transition. Right now, that production is very, very concentrated in China. About 70% of materials necessary to construct green energy, both storage and generation technology, particularly batteries and the high-density magnets necessary to power generation and motor sources necessary to do that. A lot of exploration, innovation, and diversification going on in source, predominantly now in China, but up-and-coming nations in the world that are showing prominence as sources of both of these classes of materials. Australia, Greenland, which I'm sure all of you can find on a map because it's so darn big, but who goes to Greenland? Well, lots of people will, obviously, in the future. and lots of national policy going on to both secure supply and diversify sources. So in conclusion, a few thoughts to leave with you. First is that, as it was said earlier, and I won't belabor it, energy transition makes some things better, but it also complexifies a lot of things. All of those uncertainties that you saw earlier, now take those out to a magnitude of 9. That's the world that awaits us. Relieves concern of greenhouse gases, but immensely complexifies the security challenges associated with it. Many of those sources, I didn't touch on this, but many of those sources of these elements, of course, reside in conflict-prone areas, or areas that, shall we say, are not as accepting of free markets and the dynamics of price that can allocate resources efficiently. Further, that supply chain security will not go away. It's only going to get more complex. I hope I have left that with you. And it is not only prone to all of those physical risks of disruption, but also disruptions more in the cyber realm, intellectual property realm, and so on and so forth. And last is, and Sid, a shout out to you, the investment bill for this is immense. A recent study by the International Energy and Renewable Agency estimated that the total worldwide investment necessary to get us to net zero is at least 35 trillion by 2030. Mind you, the U.S. economy last year about 24 trillion, so the total worldwide investment bill larger than the entire U.S. economy, and by 2050 about 131 trillion. Those are estimates. And in closing, Michael, I would wash all of those through my favorite philosopher and economic sage, Yogi Berra, who said that predictions about the future are especially difficult. So thank you. Over to you, sir.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Okay. All right. Our last speaker is Sarah Venkateshwari. Sarah, I just want to give you a heads up that if you stick to the time, we'll actually have about 5 minutes for questions, so people should start thinking about their questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Sarah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Michael and Andrew, for having me. I also apologize that I was not able to attend in person and hope that next year I can be there in person. I'm very much looking forward to first of all, meet you all in person and also tour the city and see the Derek Oil well. So I, just being the last speaker, I would like kind of build my analysis based on everything that has been said. So something that is important is that, as previous speakers discussed, that after specifically the war with Ukraine, the world and decision makers, it was like kind of a wake-up call that everybody started to getting closer to the traditional concept of energy security, and which was uninterrupted flow of energy at affordable price. It's very important. Before, when we were talking about affordability, we were just focusing on energy poverty, but the spike of energy prices in particularly Europe and also the world, the inflation, and that Mark already discussed that happened, but also the pain and the consequence of that on issues like food had again bring everybody back to that notion that there is a very close nexus between energy, food, and water, and all of these have impact on each other. The fertilizer companies in Europe, especially, that they stopped producing fertilizer because of lack of access to natural gas. Also, higher transportation cost increases the price of food. We are not anymore consuming the food locally. The food is transported. So all of these had impact on our economy, but also on our daily life. There are countries like what Dabiha mentioned, especially in the Gulf area, that are using a lot of electricity and a lot of energy to desalinate their water and treat the water to have a drinkable or safe water to drink. So the close nexus between energy, water, and nexus was realized again, and it was like a wake-up call in a post-Russia, since the Russia-Ukraine war, that we have to be more careful of the traditional concept of energy security, which is uninterrupted flow of energy at affordable price. And it's very interesting that the solution, that if we track the energy security all the way back to when Churchill was the Lord of Admiralty and he decided to change the fuel of British Navy from the local coal that was produced in Wales to oil and fuel oil that was coming from Persia, then his solution for energy security was diversity. Since then until now, again, the solution really to increasing the energy security resiliency is diversity. And when we are looking into energy transition, the previous speaker talked about strategic minerals, and for instance, China's dominance over strategic minerals, again, remind us that maintaining that diversity and diversified sources of supply is very important, because if you have majority of those strategic minerals being either produced, owned, or processed by one or two countries, that dependency reduces the energy security resiliency significantly. There's also issue of human rights. Again, it was mentioned about the strategic minerals, for instance, cobalt, that is used in any rechargeable batteries, from your Apple Watch mobiles to any rechargeable car. The cobalt, almost more than 70–80% of that comes from one country, Democratic Republic of Congo. And most of the mines in this country are owned by China. And there are a lot of concerns with regard to energy security, with regard to, human rights in those mines. However, if you go back to Samsung or Tesla and ask them where the cobalt is coming for your process, and is that through a clean human rights process, they said, yeah. They say, oh, yes, of course. But looking on the ground and how these minerals are mined, there is very significant human rights violations. Then there was a discussions about poverty and affordability. Mark spoke about very rightly that now is not anymore just the global South that is going to deal with the affordability, but also here people in the United States are feeling the pain of high energy prices. So affordability is very important if you want to have a just and fair transition. We cannot exclude anyone, especially, again, going back to the nexus between water, energy, and food. So affordability is really important. There are other issues that I would briefly just mention. I'll be happy if anyone had a question, we discussed that into details. Or, for instance, the color versus carbon. Again, we had other speaker, Dabiha, mentioning the Qatar's plan for hydrogen or decarbonization. There is it's important, it's a fashion talking about green. Everybody talks about green color, but not to forget that the real issue is carbon, not the color. So can we have, let's say, blue hydrogen that is more economically viable with these current technologies versus green hydrogen if we could reduce the carbon? Or could we think of having natural gas or fossil fuels being part of our basket to create that diversity, but we could reduce the carbon from that biotechnologies that, again, was mentioned during the panel, like CCS, carbon capture storage, or CCSU, to utilize that carbon later. So it's very important to be very cautious of these policies, that we need to maintain that affordability and also diversity. So how could we reduce the emissions by still maintaining that diversity while we need to produce more energy because the demand for energy is growing? And one last issue is that while it's important to look into energy and transition, it's very important to note that every country has its own unique condition and plans. We see that, for instance, the massive solar farms in countries like, let's say, UAE or Jordan or countries in Africa, that they have unused land that has been utilized for harvesting sun. But we have news like cutting billions of trees in Scotland to producing a wind farm with limited numbers of wind turbines. These are also other important issues to consider. And also, the last one is the life cycle analysis, that by some of these renewable energy that we're talking about, then how much energy we're going to consume from the point that we have to extract, mine, and also to until the end of the cycle to decommission and recycle those infrastructure, and how much energy is produced actually by those infrastructure during their lifetime. So I will stop here, Michael. I hope that I was managing to be within the time, and I'll be very happy to address questions.
Excellent. So I will open it to the audience. I have a list of questions that I can ask, but I'd rather hear from you. So anyone have a question for the panelists? Sid?
How far do you think the U.S. could go on energy security if our neighbors don't also have energy security?
Michael, can you please repeat the question?
Sure.
We can't hear them.
How far, the question was, how far can the U.S. go on energy security if our neighbors don't follow the same guidelines?
Or don't have energy
Or
security?
don't have energy security? Anyone want to start?
I'm not sure exactly where the questioner is going, but it's, the United States is going to be vulnerable in any kind of global marketplace, and there's no hiding from that. And so, if it's a question about kind of import dependence, I would say that the real story is more about your vulnerability comes from your economic dependency on a fuel and your flexibility in being able to manage around disruptions, rather than having an independent or a block of countries that kind of try to manage it alone. I think Sarah made the reference to Winston Churchill and the need for diversity. And that comes to me, my mind comes from diversity of both sources of energy as well as suppliers, and that we shouldn't forget that this trade works to our benefit most of the time because it's efficient and low cost, and that helps our consumers.
Mark, Sarah, Dabia?
I really think in the great scheme of things, the United States is really blessed by a very high degree of energy security. And we've seen from history that insecurities tend to bleed over into, I think your observation is spot on and very problematic if there are disparities in energy security.
Sarah or Dabia, do you want to add anything? You on mute?
Yeah,
Sarah?
sorry, I couldn't hear the question clearly. Apologize.
Okay, hang on. There you go, Sid.
My question was, how far could the U.S. go on energy security unless its friends, I think I use the word neighbors, but unless its friends also have a degree of energy security?
Did you get that?
Yes. Again, I defer to Mark. We have two concepts. One is energy security. One is energy independence. And while energy security is talking about diversity of suppliers, as Mark mentioned, energy independence talks about diversity of sources of energy. And in U.S., we were at some point we were significantly consuming a lot of energy and importing. And that concept of energy security, concept of energy independence, and the necessity for diversifying the sources of energy actually was the reason for further investment in technologies and also the shale boom in the US. So I think one advantage that US has is the amount of investment that the country uses for technological advancement, because most of these concerns that today we are talking about is because of the limitations we have in technologies. For instance, if technology advancement make it more beneficial or more efficient, lower cost to produce electricity or power or energy, let's say from hydrogen. All these limitations that today we're talking is because of the technological limitations we have. And my personal hope is that countries like US, that they are concerned and spending a lot of time, money, and effort in technological advancement would come up with some breakthrough that is going to produce a larger scale of affordable energy in a cleaner and more sustainable way.
Dabia, do you have anything to add?
If I want, I'd like to add, actually, Sarah covered much of it. Also, the US is very well positioned in the energy transition. You have the expert population, you have the ready investment in the R&D, you have ready food security, you have diversity in the geographical regions to produce different types of renewable energy. I think the US is well positioned to be a leader in the energy transition. The dependency on oil, again, is an issue right now with the conflict because of the oil fluctuating prices. However, I think there is an opportunity there to increase production. I understand shale played a huge part in that, but with the energy transition, I believe that the US can be pretty secure with the correct investments. And most of you can also learn from other countries. So what happened in the EU, for example, Germany invested heavily in solar, but the technology is now produced in China. So I think also the US should double down on the technology development in-house.
Okay, great. Ed, I saw your hand up.
If you look at previous energy transitions, just to simplify things from wood to coal to oil to gas, we have gone to cleaner, cheaper sources of energy in each of those transitions. So unless we have technological breakthroughs that can be implemented at scale, in order to address the climate issue, we're going to need to sacrifice our current level of energy consumption. Yet our policymakers talk about climate policies as if there are no economic trade-offs. So how do we square that circle?
Great. Who would like to tackle that one first?
That is a great answer. I don't think we know. Technology will help us. I think you've laid out the trade-offs very, very succinctly. One of the very undiscussed attributes of clean energy sources is that particularly the extraction and processing of those minerals is extraordinarily environmentally damaging. So something will have to give, and of course I gave some investment figures. Of course, those are estimates. We can expect those to go up to the extent that we wish to consume greater levels of security or environmental sustainability in terms of getting source for clean, for clean energy. I guess the good thing is that once you have invested in a clean energy system, you've sort of, in many ways, paid the dirty bill up front. So if you solve the dirty bill up front, then it might be possible to get to a better world. I think that's yet undetermined.
And I would just add, it seems like the government is more pushing the transition than the market pushing the previous transitions. All right, I think we have time for one more. It says 12:14, Andrew.
Yeah, we have time.
All right, so Brenda?
All the panelists have referred to the energy transition like a capital T, like it's a fact, like it's a train that's left the station. It's a question when a different industry or country joins it. Is there any concrete data that shows they were actually moving from a dominant source of combination of fuels to a different source of energy and not just a policy aspiration?
Okay.
Do you want me to go, Michael?
No, go ahead, Sarah.
Do you want me to answer that? There's no data, and in fact, I think it's very important to use this opportunity to mention that unfortunately now, in terms of energy transition, the policy is running way faster than research and data. So there are so many issues that we do not know. There's so many policy implementations that there's no data to back, or there's no evidence to talk about their consequences. For instance, policies like rapid change of all the US cars to solar within certain years. And there is no data to tell us that how much cobalt we need, and how much, in fact, new cars that have been produced is going to increase the demand for oil, because most of the auto bodies, or most of the things produced around us is a byproduct of a petrochemical industry. So there is no data that would tell us that how much this quick transition is going to add to, let's say, demand, oil demand, or how much electrification, which is a backbone of energy transition, or AI or cloud, are going to, in fact, increase the demand. So most of the information and speculations that we have from future, our forecasts of energy demand, in fact, are not anymore, could not be accurate, because they are not answering the traditional models that you're looking at. They are not looking at factors like AI, electrification, cloud. So to your question, the answer is no. And unfortunately, the policy and those policies that are implementing, many of them don't have even a data backing them.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And I'd like to take this opportunity for all of us to thank the panelists for a great presentation and for getting us back on track.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Michael.
Although you should drop the microphone.
Drop the microphone, exactly. Well, no, really great, great discussion, great questions. And Michael, thank you so much. Michael drove, literally did the cannonball run from New York yesterday as well, just like Milo did the day before, and came in very late last night after attending something actually in New Jersey. So really appreciative of your efforts in shepherding that panel. We will now go to lunch under the big tent outside. God has given us some great weather today to enjoy the leaves. It's a little cool, so we do have some throws out there somewhere, although I'm not exactly sure where they are. There are the same motif colors of the bags, and that's kind of it's not part of a plan, but we found them on Amazon and they matched, so here we go. Couple of announcements. One is, Victoria Coates is going to have to depart early, so we're going to flip session 6 and 5. So session 6, where we're going to have from 3 to 4, where we have, and this is news to Senator Hutchinson and Representative James probably. You're going to be on the dais with Victoria, and we're going to have a number of videos of your compatriots and fellow representatives there, and to have that discussion. So thanks for accommodating that to everybody. And then we'll conclude, which I think is actually maybe appropriate, with a real powerhouse panel on the risks of great power competition to energy security. And then we will go after that, and I promise not to belabor it too much, into the cocktail reception out here under the tent once again, and then to dinner over at the Ironworks. One last thing, and this is also great weather for this, Michael Knecht of Drake Well, who runs this wonderful site with Friends of Drake Well and all the staff, has told us that the replica currently is working, the steam engine. It stops working at 3, so this is over lunch. Grab your plate or whatever you need to do, your drink, and walk out there. If you have never seen the replica or had anyone explain it to you, you got to do it. It's so interesting and something you won't forget. Okay? See you back here at 1:30. Enjoy your lunch.